Hello and welcome back to Learning with Luke, our 2-year journey through the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. We have now gotten to the beginning of chapter 5. We've had all of our origin stories. Jesus has launched his public ministry, and now he is going to start building his team, and we will see how that goes today. Our passage today is from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 5, verses 1 through 16. Let us listen for the word of God. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let your nets down for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to burst. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were astounded at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Once, when he was in one of the cities, a man covered with a skin disease was there. When he saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Then Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "I am willing. Be made clean." Immediately the skin disease left him, and he ordered him to tell no one. "But go, show yourself to the priest, and as Moses commanded, make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them." But now more than ever, the word about Jesus spread around. Many crowds were gathering to hear him and to be cured of their diseases. Meanwhile, he would slip away to deserted places and pray. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. So Jesus needs to build a team. We've already seen that he is being just inundated with people coming with requests for healing, for that is how he started his public ministry, with healing. And he is going to need other witnesses, not only because there's so much need while Jesus is alive, but of course this movement of God, this gospel movement, if you will need to continue. And so Jesus will need disciples. That's a word that means one who learns. It's like a student. And apostles. The word apostle means those who are sent. So Jesus gathers disciples and then sends apostles. And this is a pattern that we will see throughout Luke's gospel and then the book of Acts, that Jesus calls people to himself to learn, to trust his word, to behold the power of God, and then he will send them out to share that good news with others. So he needs to find followers. And it always strikes me, if we were going to have applications for followers to Jesus today, what kinds of skills and tasks and qualifications and characteristics would we look for? We'd look for people who are loyal. We'd look for people who have some creative insight to how the world not only does work, but could work. We would have people who are steadfast. We would have people who are honest. And as it turns out, these are not the qualities of any of the people that Jesus chose. Some of them were just downright scoundrels. I think of the Apostle Paul. We're going to meet Paul in the book of Acts. And when we first meet him, there is absolutely nothing likable about him. And yet he becomes one of the cornerstone apostles of the early church. We have Peter here. Peter himself knows that he's a sinner. When Jesus helps them catch this miraculous catch, Peter says, "You get away from me. I'm a sinful man and I have no business with you." But of course, Jesus says to him, and Jesus says to all of us, "Yes, I do have business with you. Yes, I know you're a sinner. Yes, I know you will not always be loyal. Yes, I know you will not only make mistakes, but you will fail. And you will fail because you did not trust me enough." Jesus already knows that about us. Our weaknesses and our sin are already baked into the equation. And while Jesus gets disappointed with the disciples, and we'll see that throughout the gospel, he never gives up on them. And while he can be disappointed with us, he never gives up with us either. So let's look at these stories a little bit. Jesus is in the northern part of Palestine, called Galilee. In Luke's gospel, that's where his family is from. In Matthew's gospel, that's where they go to. But in Luke, that is his hometown. And so he's all around that region in these early chapters of his public ministry in the Gospel of Luke. And he goes to the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowds just keep coming. Luke never wants us to forget that Jesus was quite a sensation. And so Jesus needs a pulpit. That's what we're supposed to imagine here. And so there's these two boats. The fishermen are cleaning their nets. That's just part of the drudgery of the work of being a fisherman. And he gets into one of the boats and asks them to go out just a little bit from the shore. And that way, Jesus can address more people at once, and they can't just sort of press in on him and keep him from ministering to the whole crowd. And so what we have this picture of is kind of this movable pulpit. It's a wonderful little scene where Jesus, it's just good crowd management. And so he puts a little out from shore so they can still hear him. More people can come, but there's some crowd control. And those in the front don't get some advantage that those further back can't get. And then he finishes his teaching, and he says to Simon, "Let's go out into the deep water and let's catch some fish." And Simon knows that this is just a ridiculous request because they've been working all night long. They have caught nothing. I mean, it's not even like they had a poor catch. They have caught nothing. And they're fishermen. This is their trade. And they know Jesus is not. You just see it in his hands. While he has certainly rough hands from being a carpenter, they're not the gouged up hands of people dealing with hooks, and also the weather-beaten hands of people who are out on the sea all of the time. And so Peter just gets real practical and says, "This makes no sense." But Jesus says, "No, I want you to do it." And he says, "Well, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do." And so they go out and they put their nets down, and they are so full that the nets begin to tear. So they hold the net in place and call their partners, because there's two boats, and as it turns out, they're a consortium of fishermen. They call them out so they can help them bring this catch into shore so they can earn money for their families. And the catch is so large that both boats almost capsize from the weight of the fish that they have caught. It's really a remarkable miracle because there were no fish to be caught that day. They had gone to a different part of the lake, or they were at a deeper depth. Whatever the problem was, they were not catching anything, and all of a sudden they have the largest catch they've ever seen, so large that they need two boats to struggle to bring it into shore. And then that's when Peter has his moment of self-awareness. "Get away from me, for I'm a sinful man." And then Jesus says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching people." Same general movements in life. You go out, you look for the best place to connect, you do your best work, and you bring in your haul. But now, of course, it's not going to be fish that you can sell at market, but it is going to be lives that will be transformed by the love of Jesus Christ. And so here we have this image of tremendous growth of the church. And we will see this hall that is so great that the nets of the church almost burst on Pentecost morning. That's yet to come. But Jesus is promising that through his power and through his ability, through his word, there will be a tremendous catch of souls. And this is kind of hard for us in the modern mainline churches to wrap our heads around, because it's been a long time since we have grown so profoundly that we've just come to expect that the net of our church will burst. Most of us worship in sanctuaries that could hold far more people than they currently hold. Lots of churches built a sanctuary at the time of their height. I was at one church that completed their education building the year before their membership started to decline, and it declined almost every year after that. That was in the very late 50s, and it declined through the 60s and the 70s, and they had a renaissance in the 80s and 90s, and it started to grow again, but never to the level that it was when they built that. And of course that makes sense, because their nets had burst, and so they built new, bigger nets, this education building in this church's case. And you know, there's all kinds of sociological reasons why churches in the mainline, Protestant, or Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, United Church of Christ, started to decline in the late 1950s and through the 60s. But I think one of the reasons that we declined, and one of the reasons why our church still does not grow, and I don't mean just First Presbyterian Church, I mean the Presbyterian Church USA and all these mainline denominations, one of the reasons we don't grow is because we have lost sight of this story. We have lost sight of the miraculous things that not only Jesus can do, but Jesus will do with us and through us as we become those who now catch people. I think we've forgotten that we're supposed to do it. I think we've forgotten how to do it. And I think we have lost track of the fact that this is one of the things that Jesus calls us to do. And I know the word evangelism can be very scary for Presbyterians. We don't like the high pressure tactics, the kind of pressing it on people that we have seen, many of us in our lifetime. And yet, joyful evangelism used to be a cornerstone of the Presbyterian Church. My great-great-great-grandfather, Henry Little, was part of what was called the New School Presbyterian Church in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. And one of the things that differentiated the New School from the Old School is that the New School believed in revivals. They believed that one of the ways we help people come to faith is by helping them gain a passionate fire for the good news of Jesus Christ, for forgiveness, for salvation, for newness of life. And my great-great-great-grandfather, Henry Little, used to preach revivals. And at the end of the revivals, they would have altar calls. And it was all very energized and energetic. And I think we've lost track of that in the 20th century. And one of the things that gives me great hope is that we can always recover this. This goes back to the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, is that phenomenal growth beyond our wildest dreams is not only possible, but to be expected. We will see in Acts chapter 2 on the morning of Pentecost that 3,000 people were baptized that day. While I don't expect a regular baptism rate at our church of 3,000 people, what if we imagine that that is what God desired? What would we do differently? I suspect, like Peter, there'd be a lot of anxiety and fear. Peter was not immediately happy about this great catch. He didn't think, oh my gosh, hitch my wagon to Jesus and we're going to be living on Easy Street. This created a conflict within him. He knew he was not worthy of this power, and yet the power was given to him, although not for his own gain, but for the gain of the kingdom. And, and it was so profound. Luke tells us that when they brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Even apparently that big catch that was in the boat. I hope somebody else came by and brought it to the market and made a lot of money. But Peter and James and John, and I assume Andrew, who was Simon's brother, or Peter's brother, never looked back. They left it there and they followed Jesus because new expectations had overtaken them. And then, so we don't forget what the ministry is all about, Luke immediately goes back to Jesus' first presentation of the gospel indeed, and that is to healing. So there's this miraculous catch of fish that gets Jesus his first 4 disciples, and then we're right back to healing, lest we forget how these disciples are going to be catching people. It's not just going to be standing on a street corner and asking them where they think they're going to spend eternity, but it's addressing real and pressing needs that people have. That's what gets people's attention. Jesus was always doing very practical things. He was feeding people. He was healing people. He was loving people. He was welcoming people. Those are the cornerstones of evangelism. To be sure, Jesus did a lot of teaching, and we'll see that teaching. In another chapter, we get to Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, which is in Luke, the Sermon on the Plain. Jesus doesn't go up, he stays level with the people, and there's lots of imagery in that as well, and we'll get to that in a couple more episodes. But to begin with, it's right back to healing. And we have this man with a skin disease. It's not called leprosy here, but there's something that has affected his outward being. And not only, though, does it affect his outward being because he is seen as unclean and polluted, it affects his inward being because he is prevented from going to the synagogue to worship God because the unclean are not allowed to come. And he has this really, really interesting exchange with Jesus. He doesn't say, make me clean. He says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Isn't that interesting? He knows that Jesus has power, but it will require Jesus' consent. That this is not just a plea for help, but it's really an exchange. It's really, if you notice me, if you will bother, I can be made whole. And Jesus says, I am willing. And it's this lovely, he stretches out his hand and touches him. This is a man who's never being touched. People stay away from him. They avoid him lest they become polluted themselves. Jesus does not care about pollution. For him, pollution is what comes out of our hearts, not from our physical being. And he touches him and says, I am willing, be made clean. And then to make sure that this healing is complete, that it's not just about his skin being restored, but about him being restored to his community, his faith community, his local community, being restored with God, he instructs him to show himself to the priest, that the priest might declare him clean, that he can then be readmitted, if you will, into the community of faith. And then the word spreads even more, and they keep gathering to hear him. Isn't it amazing that the more people's lives that are touched, the more the word gets out. And just like that huge catch of fish, now they're seeing this huge catch of people. And lest we forget how hard this work is, what the toll of this work is. And there is a toll. It does take real effort. It means we have to live differently. It means we have to think differently. It means we, as the disciples of Jesus and those who are sent out, the apostles of Jesus, we will have to bear the cost of that. It's tiring. It means we always have to be trusting in God, and that's hard for us sometimes. We want to trust in God, and yet can God be relied on? And so we also have to keep working at that. We have to keep extending ourselves. We have to keep on that path. And so we don't forget that this is hard work and we need our own rest and restoration, Luke closes this episode of healing with, meanwhile, he, that is Jesus, would slip away to a deserted place and pray. Jesus always took care of himself in the midst of this demanding ministry, and we are called to do no less. It is my hope that these reflections and these words give you renewal, fill you with hope, fill you with a new purpose, and also give you rest. May God bless you.